Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle brought to you by Believe. I'm JR, and today I'm joined by Big Jeff for part two of this Big Jeff's Insights episode where we compare Big Ten teams. Today, we are taking a closer look at Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, Michigan State, Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue, Rutgers, and Wisconsin, matching each of these programs with other programs they're most like, the ones they want to be like, and the ones that they should strive to be like, even if it seems a little bit like a long shot. Before we get into it, please do like, subscribe, comment on YouTube, or drop a 5-star review on the podcast platform as well. It really helps us out. Follow us on Twitter, X, TikTok, Instagram, all those things at the Big Ten Huddle. We're going to have a great episode as we have Jeff with us from Big Ten country. Jeff, you've got the woods in the background, no more Georgia or anything. You're in Big Ten country. How's it feel?
So yeah, I'm up northern Wisconsin, Tomahawk, Wisconsin. It's northwest of Green Bay, probably by a good couple hours. So really, Badger territory, I guess. My brother and sister have second homes on a lake here. So I'm outside. It will be interesting. There's a chance there could be a pop-up shower that lands on me. There could be a swarm of mosquitoes that comes. And Jared, the biggest thing is I made the packing mistake of the decade for my family. I did not pack the Big Ten umpire's hat I usually wear. That's the signature, for Big Jeff. So I'm not sure if I really am Big Jeff tonight. I mean, what do you think? I'm wearing this is not Miami of Ohio. This is my kids' summer swim team, the Marlins. And it's one of the reasons why JR and I were not live a lot on Thursday nights because we had swim meets on Thursday nights. So anyway, kind of cool, though, being in northern Big Ten territory.
For sure. Well, we will recognize you. We'll believe it's you, not an imposter today or anything. So we appreciate you being here with us, Jeff. Jeff, we got so much to talk about with these program comparisons. I'm just fascinated by what you've come up with here. So let's go ahead and take a look at them. Jeff, why don't you go ahead and just kind of explain again, even if people caught part one, if you didn't catch part one, if your team is not mentioned this one, you'll want to go over to that one because it is an interesting episode. But go ahead and Jeff, let people know what you kind of did here a little bit for each one, and then you can pick a team to start off with.
Yeah, and the reason we're going through this exercise is, defining success for any team is relative. The expectations for an Ohio State are going to be way different than they are for Purdue. And I think when we think about, this next season and future seasons, it's important to understand where the history of programs, kind of where they've the success they've experienced in evaluating what's possible for them in the future. So we had one episode where we took the record by decade within the conference back to 1970. And some people question, why go back to 1970? That's so far back, it's irrelevant. Well, if you were good in the 70s and 80s, why couldn't you be good now, given the resources that the Big Ten has financially, right? If you had that history, there's no reason you couldn't be. So I think that exercise is important as we head for the next few weeks where we're really going to get into the, predictions for 2025. And so what you see in this table, we're taking the, I would call the bottom half of the Big Ten this week. We took the top half last week. And we do have some basic statistics we're going to go through for each team. And again, that kind of sets the stage to understand, what they're potentially capable of from how they performed, how have they recruited nationally the last 5 years, which is kind of the fourth column here. And the fifth column is, how well are they at development, at producing NFL draft picks? And I think that's pretty telling for each of these programs. So we're going to give a little bit of background data, but then talk about what is the school they're closest to now, what school they should strive to be that is a realistic goal, so like to improve and be better. And then what is a real stretch goal? Like, this is the ideal program, maybe based on cultural fit and some similarities, but choose a school that has a lot more success than this current program. So that's the exercise tonight.
Yeah, really good information here. I think it's going to be really interesting to talk about, like it was for the last one. I do want to clarify. Jeff said bottom half of the Big Ten. These are not Big Ten power rankings. We're doing the bottom half for. This is just like kind of where the programs are at right now. So yes, Indiana, you did make the playoffs last year, but you look at your program historically, and you're still in the bottom half. But if you're talking about this season, obviously not in the bottom half there. So I just want to make sure we don't get Indiana fans coming at us saying,
That's
"Why
right.
you got us finishing 17th in the Big Ten?" Don't worry, Indiana fans. It's just for the exercise,
That's
okay?
right. Yeah. And I should have clarified that these are sorted in order of conference record win rate since 1970. So it really represents the last 50 years of performance. And, not surprising, Indiana has been pretty bad. And if it wasn't for last year, Indiana would be dead last, frankly. So, but that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen in the future. That's a much different conversation. So that's how we kind of divided this into two, sorted it by conference record since 1970.
Love it. Love it. All right, Jeff. Where would you like to start at?
Yeah, let's start at the top. And just as a programming note, we might not get through all these in detail. So we're going to cover some of them in detail. And near the end, we might say, okay, the remaining two or three, let's kind of go through a little bit more quickly. But we do plan to cover everyone to some level. So I'm going to start out with what I call the number 10 team, Michigan State. So they've had the 10th best conference winning percentage since 1970 in the Big Ten. So of the 18 Big Ten teams. And if any team was outside the Big Ten, we looked at, for example, USC, we took at their conference record in the Pac-12 going back many years. So it was an apples to apples comparison, so to speak. But they had a 54% win rate since 1970. So that's good, right? I mean, they win more often than they lose in the Big Ten. But the last 5 years, they've only won at a 40% clip, and that's in the third column there. From a recruiting perspective, Michigan State's 38th in the nation on average the last 5 years. I consider that kind of disappointing, actually, for a school like Michigan State and their capability. And then for NFL draft production, they're 46th. Again, should be better than that, and they were under D'Antonio, but that has slipped here. So who are they like now? What program would be a good barometer? I'm going to call Auburn as a good program because both programs have had some really good success in the past, but they've struggled in recent years. And for sure, Auburn has experienced in that. Auburn is also overshadowed by Alabama, a huge blue blood in the same state. Michigan State is overshadowed by Michigan in the same state, and they're both in very tough conferences, right? The Big Ten and the SEC. The other thing is Michigan State can upset and win some big games and beat Michigan, beat Big Brother a few times, right? And Auburn certainly has upset Michigan sometimes through the years. And so I guess that's the comp for now, mostly based on the struggles recently. Now, who should they be like? You could almost flip-flop these two. I'm calling out Texas A&M because I actually view Texas A&M's future is very bright, given the financial resources they have, and now that they're in the SEC. So they have had, an up and down pass like Michigan State has. They're also been overshadowed by Texas within state and within conference. So I think that's what also makes them, comparable to for Michigan State. And then, Mike Elko, the fact that he's in his second year this year, considered a really good coach, just like Jonathan Smith is for Michigan State, and both are in their second years, both well respected. So I think that really aligns well. And I just think so that's a pretty good comp. And I think Texas A&M's future is very, very bright. And if Jonathan Smith is who we think he is, then the future is also bright for Michigan State. And then finally, who they most want to be like, I'm going to call out Penn State. So within conference, Michigan State would like to consistently beat all the teams you're supposed to, like Penn State has. Michigan State hasn't done that. Penn State is consistently in the top 25 and often in the top 15 and 10. Michigan State would love to have that consistency. And then, I guess the one difference is Penn State hasn't been beating the Blue Bloods. So that would be, Michigan State wants to beat Penn State, but periodically certainly beat Michigan and even sometimes Ohio State. But, Michigan State seeking Penn State's more consistency of top 15 or so, JR, is the biggest reason I have for the most what they want to be like. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think you got really good analysis here. I think Auburn is a really good choice. Auburn obviously won the national championship. Michigan State never got that far. However, you could argue that if Michigan State found themselves a special quarterback like Auburn did, then they might have been
Cam
able to
Newton.
do
Yep.
that at some point. Um, Texas A&M, I see what you're doing with that one. I can't get over the money thing. I mean, Michigan State just hasn't been very good with their money. I do I see what you're saying with like the amount that they've won and the possibilities, I suppose, with what Michigan State once was under D'Antonio. But I feel like Texas A&M has so much more money and so much more ability to just go out and buy players, and Michigan State doesn't really seem to have that. I almost wonder if a program they should realistically try to be like is like maybe from like the Big 12 or something like that. Is there a Big 12 program that has, been pretty consistently at the top, being able to do well, and they have a couple years or maybe 1 or 2 years where they get up there and really compete with the big dogs? It's hard because we don't really see the Big 12 get that kind of representation at the national level. Arizona State is probably the best comparison there with Kenny Dillingham, young coach. Jonathan Smith's a pretty young coach. So maybe that, but Arizona State was only up there for 1 year. We'll see what Arizona State is this year. Still probably going to be pretty good, especially if you play the NCAA football video game. They have a very high overall rating there. And then Penn State, I think, is accurate for who they should strive to want to be like, and everything.
Yeah,
So
I think you have a good point on Texas A&M. That is one. This is one I don't feel real strong about.
mhm.
JR, to be honest, as I looked at other conferences, I struggled to find good Big 12 or ACC teams to compare for the Big Ten. It's almost like SEC won the day more, and then Clemson, I wanted to bring in some. So I know what you mean. And I'm also trying not to name some of the same schools, even though tonight I'm going to name some of the same schools a few times. It's almost, in some cases, you can't help it because there's no good comp, right? And so that's another thing with all this. Sometimes there's just not a great comp. And I think, who they should be like for Michigan State, it is a little harder to come up with a great one, I think. So good point there.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest part too. There's not really one that kind of pops out as one
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
that one that you do. So hey, let's do Indiana next. We got some Indiana fans that watch the show and everything. Let's do
All right.
Indiana.
We're going to jump down. So Indiana is number 17. And again, like we were saying earlier, this is based on conference win rate since 1970, only a 29% win rate. And remember, that includes the 8-1 season that they just experienced. So really bad. Their 5-year recruiting average is 52nd in the nation. For a Big Ten program, that's not good, to be frank. And then, but I was actually surprised that's only 4th worst in the Big Ten. So they're actually, relative to their win rate, their 5-year recruiting rate is not quite as bad. What really sets apart IU in a bad way, though, JR, they are atrocious in the Big Ten worst at NFL draft pick production. They're tied for 77th in the nation in producing NFL draft picks the last 5 years. That means they've been by far the worst developer of talent in the Big Ten. They have not had a first-round pick. And my friends, I'm an Indiana graduate, 1990. We joke about this. The last first-round pick for Indiana, 1994. 1994. Thomas Lewis, wide receiver to the Giants, was their last first-round pick. So, that's the history of Indiana. Who are they most like now? I'm going to call out Kansas. Both are traditional blue blood basketball schools, although Indiana has not even been acting like a blue blood basketball team for sure. And then both have had periodic but limited football success. So, Indiana under Bill Mallory in the 80s, Tom Allen had a couple good years, but really lack any football success for both schools has been really short-lived. So Kansas is the comp. Who they should be like, I've used Washington before in the part 1 of this last week, but Washington winning at 60% in conference, I just think a lot of these schools, that are well below 500 in conference, a 60% win rate would be a great thing to be like, right? So that 60% also would be sixth best in the Big Ten since 1970 to show how good that is. 60% might not sound all that impressive, but it really is. And then, Washington's been in the playoffs a couple times. So Indiana was just there. They want to be in the playoffs periodically. I think that's reasonable if it's a, 12 or 16 team playoff. And then consistently going to bowl games would make Indiana fans very happy. So Washington's who we should be like. And then who do most want to be like? Very specifically, Michigan State, but under Mark D'Antonio. So that's like the golden years of D'Antonio, 2010 to 2017. In the 2010s, he won at a 67% rate in the Big Ten. So 2 out of 3 games they won. They made the 14 playoffs, of course, and he was 78-28 overall. That's not conference, but overall, D'Antonio, was winning 8 games to losing 3, basically. That's really good performance. I think under Cignetti, that's a ceiling that's possible, right? Indiana does have some deep pockets in this NIL area, not just going to go to basketball. It's being used for football too. And then, sometimes beating the Blue Bloods like D'Antonio did, Michigan, Ohio State, something Indiana's really struggled with. They would love to have that. So I think really the stretch one with Michigan State under D'Antonio, I think is a really good one for Indiana. JR, what do you think?
Yeah, I really like what you did here with Indiana. Kansas is a good pick, especially since Kansas has kind of found not playoff success under Lance Leopold. There, I do think that if Indiana is able to make the playoffs again, whether it's this year or next year, I do think they'll surpass that. The team I was gonna say that they should be like, I agree with Washington with you in terms of the success, but if you kind of think of the program and where the program is at and the coach and everything else, the team they should strive to be like, to me, and this might not sound right when I first say it, but just listen to my reasoning, is actually Utah. Okay, Utah, you have them up there for a different team. The reason I say Utah is because Utah is a program that saw success winning the Pac-12, and nobody really saw it coming every year. Everybody had a lot of respect for Kyle Whittingham and the coach that he is, but nobody really saw Utah winning the Big 12, and they were able to do that, or the Pac-12, and they were able to do that. Was it once or twice under him when things were getting going there a little bit in the Pac-12? I think if Indiana could model that success in the Big Ten, at the very least, get to some Big Ten championships games or just kind of hover around the top 3, top 4, that would be like Utah a little bit, especially the coach stuff, right? You want Kirk Cinetti to start being considered a top 10 head coach like Kyle Whittingham is. It's like every single year Kyle Whittingham is put in the top 10, and he's just kind of the coach that's there that doesn't really go to the playoffs, but people respect him for what he can do in his program. Obviously, Indiana has been to the playoffs, but even if Indiana isn't getting to the playoffs, you still want that comparison to a top 10 head coach. And I think that, maybe not the success of Utah, because Utah hasn't gone to the playoffs at all, I don't think, but at least in terms of the consideration for the coach and stuff like that. And I think you just absolutely nailed it with Michigan State, D'Antonio era. I mean, I don't think there's anything more than Indiana could hope for than being Michigan State under D'Antonio.
Yeah, I love the Utah comp. I mean, I'm going to use them twice here for other teams. I could have used them for more. It's kind of like, I want to go into that well too often, but I like that as a be like for Indiana for sure. It's a good one.
Very good. Very good. Well, let's go ahead and go to one of the teams that has a Utah comp, because we do have some people that listen from there. Minnesota.
Okay.
Excuse me. And I was coughing into the microphone last time you were talking. I'm sorry. I thought I had it muted. I won't do that again. But let's go to Minnesota here, Jeff. What are your thoughts on them?
So let's do that. So, so they're 15th in win rate since 1970, so only a 38% win rate. I covered this in 2 podcasts ago. In the 2020s, their win rate is 51% in conference. So PJ Fleck is the only coach since 1970 to have a winning record in conference within a decade. I know he takes a lot of flack, but he is a good coach, especially relative to how Minnesota has performed in the past. Their 5-year recruiting average is I'd call it a respectable 43rd in the nation, but they've done really well at development. So 34th in the nation the last 5 years in generating NFL draft picks. So, a sign of a good coaching staff is good player development. So they definitely have that going on. So who are they most like now? I'm comping them to Iowa State in the Big 12. So similar to Iowa State, they've played second fiddle to Iowa, within state. Now for Minnesota, they don't have a major team, but I would say Minnesota through the years really has been under the shadow of Wisconsin, one of their big rivals. I mean, only recently have they even beat them. For years and years, the Paul Bunyan Zacks was staying in Madison. And so, they've been under the shadow of Wisconsin. Both programs have good, younger, I'd call them youngish, if that's a word, but experienced coaches. So PJ Fleck and Matt Campbell, I don't look at them as old coaches. They're kind of like middle-aged, experienced, good, solid coaches. Many programs would love to have them. And then some years where they were close to having a true breakout. Minnesota in 2019 went 11-2 overall, 7-2 in conference. And you could argue Matt Campbell and Iowa State last year almost kind of broke out. So I think I feel good about that comp. Who Minnesota should be like? Utah. So we just talked about them, JR. Minnesota has similarities to how Wisconsin used to be, but just going outside of conference with Utah, I like a little better. A higher level of winning for sure from Utah than the 51% that Minnesota has experienced this decade. And then both having strong run and defense-oriented culture. Utah has that, and that's why the comp is good, I think, for Minnesota. And then who they most want to be like. So if you took Utah and took it to another level, I would say that would be like Michigan pre-2021 under Harbaugh. So Michigan was really good every year, right? They just struggled to beat Ohio State, but they were right there. I think it's a stretch to say like Michigan is now, because that would mean potentially challenging for national championships. That would be a little hard to see because you'd have to get your recruiting up to top 10 like levels. And that's going to be very difficult for a school like Wisconsin, or for a school like Minnesota, excuse me. But also, being consistently in the top 25 like Michigan was under Harbaugh's first 6 years would be awesome for them. What are your thoughts on those, JR?
Yeah, Minnesota is really difficult to do this with, in my opinion, because they do have some of these numbers that are hovering around 50%, and then you go to the 70s, it's, that 38%. But I feel like the program is at a better place than those numbers indicate under PJ Fleck. I agree with the Iowa State for where they're at right now. I really like the coaching comparison you made and everything there. When Harbaugh was rumored to be out at Michigan, both Matt Campbell and PJ Fleck were two coaches that were kind of rumored to possibly go to Michigan. Now PJ Fleck gets rumored for jobs all the time, so it's not like
As is Matt Campbell, like
right,
ton.
right.
Yeah.
So it's not like that's the only thing that's ever happened with them. But I see the comparison that's being made there between the coaches. If I'm going to go to a different team, honestly, and maybe this fits more of who they should want to be like. So maybe I'll say this for them. If I'm going to go with somebody instead of Utah, I think Utah is a good pick. But if I'm going to go with somebody instead of Utah, I'm going to go with Missouri and what they've been able to do lately, right? Eli Drinkowitz, young coach there, kind of struggled at first. PJ Fleck didn't struggle at first, but I could see PJ Fleck kind of getting to that point where they're going to bigger bowl games and winning them too, right? Eli Drinkowitz went to a bowl game and beat Ohio State. Now, Ohio State had some different stuff going on, but still, you won the bowl game, you beat Ohio State, so you get some credit there. I could see PJ Fleck doing some stuff like that, and I could see, them kind of. It's really frustrating that Minnesota doesn't get any of the allure that Missouri gets. I felt like all last year Missouri was like, oh yeah, we're gonna, we're a ranked team and everything, but every time they played a good team, they got curb stomped. And it's like Minnesota played a good team in Penn State last year and they hung with them the entire game. Minnesota beat beat USC. The games they lost were so close, and it was just because of missed field goals or decision here, a decision there, right? I mean, who can forget the Michigan game last year with the onside kick and everything else? Like, it just felt like they had some games ripped away from them. If one or two of those things goes differently, I feel like there's a different national perception of Minnesota. So, and then, Michigan pre Harbaugh's national championship contending years. I totally agree. I think that PJ Fleck should aspire to be there. I guess the only thing I'll say is I don't think it's out of stretch. I don't think it's too far to stretch out. I think that Minnesota could recruit in some of the similar ways that Michigan was under Jim Harbaugh before he really started going to the playoffs and could excel in
Yep.
those ways.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah. I do think the Missouri thing, the fact that they beat Ohio State in that bowl game last year, that's a compliment to our conference, right? The fact that they beat a school like that. But as everyone knows, I mean, once we get in the season, you're going to hear me say this. Football is about matchups and motivation. And in that game, Missouri had all the motivation. Ohio State had none. They wanted to be in the playoffs, and it was just super disappointing. They were not excited to be there. And then they also didn't have a quarterback who had any experience. So you can kind of like explain it away a little, but still give Missouri credit for that. And they kind of rode that during the season. I agree. It was pretty frustrating because I didn't feel that they were all that great. All right, JR, where do you want to go now? I mean,
well, I know our Illinois fans are probably screaming at the screen right now and saying, or they're screaming at their headphones right now if they're listening on podcasts saying, do Illinois, do Illinois. So let's give the people what they want, Jeff. Let's talk about Illinois.
Do Illinois. I don't know if I'm loving one of these that much, but so Illinois' 14th best record since 1970 in the Big Ten, so 40% win rate. That kind of speaks for itself. Actually, did I have that right? Yeah, 40% and only 40. Despite how good Bielema's been, their last 5 years, they're only winning at 45% in the conference. And maybe that's because 4 or 5 years ago, they were like really bad. Recruiting 51st in the nation the last 5 years. That's not nearly good enough, given you have the Chicago area to recruit from. And then draft production is better, tied for 32nd. I do think that's the Bielema factor there, that he's definitely developed players well, put players in the NFL. So I'm going to give, who they're most like now, Arkansas. Now, remember Illinois, despite having a really good year last year, the prior year was pretty disappointing. I think they were 5-7. And then 3 years ago, they had that really good year. And then the wheels kind of fell off a little bit at the end, but still a good year. But it's not like they've been rolling, for 3 or 4 years now, which you almost, with the way Illinois is being covered, you feel like that you would think that they have been like well over 500 for 3 straight years now, but it's not quite the case. So, just Arkansas, because historical underperformers in very tough conferences, and a feeling they both should win more consistently. Arkansas has access to a lot of good talent out of Texas and everything, and nice campus and all that kind of good stuff. So, and then kind of cool because Bielema coached at both places. So, I don't know if Illinois fans would like that as a comp, but I put that there. Who they should be like is Iowa. That just simply because winning more consistently. And that's been Illinois' problem. Every time they've had a great year, the next year has been a clunker. So that's why I'm really interested in seeing what this year is. But they have that history of that. Iowa's been winning at a 54% clip versus Illinois' 40%. That's a huge difference, 14%, and just being a more consistent winner. And then, similar, Iowa can upset teams at home. There's no reason Illinois can't do that. So that's who they should be like in my book. And then who they most want to be like, I'm saying Wisconsin under Bielema when he had it rolling. So for those who have listened to prior podcasts, 76% win rate for the Badgers in the 2010s. They had the second best Big Ten winning percentage next to Ohio State. Some of that had to do with the Big Ten West, but not all of it. They were well coached. They put a lot of players in the NFL, strong culture, running the ball, defense. And that's kind of what Bielema wants to be. Maybe not quite as focused on running as he was at Wisconsin, but definitely wants to be strong in the run game, control the clock, limit mistakes, and just play sound football and win football games. And that's exactly what he did last year. So that's my stretch goal for the Illini.
Yeah, I think this was a very Big Ten heavy one, right? Arkansas, the comparison there with where Brett used to be, Iowa where Brett used to play, and then Wisconsin where Brett used to coach. This one just kind of made me laugh. It's not made me laugh because it's untrue at all.
Yeah.
I think they all have truthful aspects to them, but it was just kind of funny seeing all the places that Brett has been. Oh, the places that Bert has been. Yeah, I agree with Arkansas. If I was going to offer a counter one, honestly, I might offer up BYU
Okay.
for Illinois there. BYU has kind of had some success lately. They did have back-to-back 10-win seasons in 2020 and 2021, but then they followed that up with 8-5, then 5-7, and then another 10-win or 11-win season in 2024. They did get to 11 wins in 2020. So that one might be a bit of a stretch, but you look at some of the percentages and stuff like that, and it looks like Illinois is kind of close to BYU, at least in the past 5 years. Iowa, I agree. If they could just kind of have the consistency of Iowa get to that point, it would mean a lot for the program. I think that people would look at them differently. It does kind of surprise me they're getting the love that they're getting this season. Not that they don't deserve it, but it's a program that hasn't been consistent, so you would think there'd be more naysayers to it. However, people are loving them some Illinois this season, and I love to see that for the Big Ten, and I think that Illinois is going to have a good season this year. And then Wisconsin under Brett Bielema, just that's exactly correct. That's what you want to be. Basically, you want to try and get like the recent team that's been doing a good job with the getting to the Big Ten championship from the Big Ten West, and then you ultimately want to get to the team that first dominated the Big Ten West, which was Wisconsin under Burt Bielema. Really good comparisons here.
Yeah, I think so too. I feel pretty good. The Arkansas was the one I was like, yeah, but
Well, and that's another one that's kind of hard. BYU doesn't fit exactly, but I could see some aspects to it there. So, yeah, interesting trying to find that one. All right, Jeff, let's get to Maryland. We got some people from Maryland that watch, excited about their program. This is probably the
yeah,
last one we'll go in depth in. We'll probably have to speed through Wisconsin, Northwestern,
yeah.
Purdue, and Rutgers.
Okay, so Maryland, 46% win rate since 1970, so that's under 500, obviously. 5-year national recruiting average of 30th in the nation. As far as putting NFL draft picks, generating NFL draft picks, 29th in the nation. So based on recruiting and NFL talent produced, their Big Ten conference record, and really the last 5 years, it's been only 34% should be better. I know they were in the Big Ten East 4 out of those 5 years. That's a big deal. I get it. But they still could have been beating more of the mid-tier teams, more consistently beating them. I just think given the talent, they should have a better win rate than they have. But the good news is they're no longer in the Big Ten East. The bad news is they got the 4 new Pac-12 teams that came aboard who are really good. And I just think, the access to talent in that region, the Big Ten's finances and everything, they should be better. So who are they most like now? I'm saying Virginia. Virginia's always been a school that people have looked at as like, why aren't these guys better? I mean, substantial potential, a great school, beautiful campus, access to a lot of talent in the Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, the DMV. And then, so it's just kind of like a consistently disappointing team, kind of like Maryland has been, both of them with access to some of the same talent bases there in the Northeast. Who they should be more like, I'm saying North Carolina. I just think North Carolina, a higher level of success for sure, making bowl games more efficiently, more consistently, I should say. And like North Carolina, they're kind of overshadowed by their basketball teams. The fan base probably cares more about basketball than they do football. I'm not saying they don't care about football, but you're going to care more about basketball like North Carolina does. And then kind of both held back by subpar defenses, right? North Carolina has some really good offenses, some good talent. You got Maryland with some firepower on offense for sure. They put some good receivers in the NFL. Their receiving core last year was really good. Just defense to me has been what's held out back both programs. So that's why I think that's a good comp. And who they most want to be like, I'm going to call it Ole Miss. both longtime underachieving programs. That was Ole Miss. I mean, they weren't good since Archie Manning back in the 70s, and then briefly under Eli Manning, but that was only like a 2-year window when they were good. So Ole Miss is doing quite well now under Lane Kiffin, way better than they historically are. If Maryland could get to that, and I think they can in the 70s, by decade, they actually had a really strong winning percentage back in the 70s. So it is possible with the right coach, Maryland could be like an Ole Miss. What do you think, JR?
Yeah, I like your Maryland analysis here. Virginia's a really good one as well. Virginia has some good talent there. I mean, they've had a number of really good players come out of there. I'm not quite sure it's enough talent to sustain a couple programs. You have both Virginia and Virginia Tech in there. However, it should be enough to sustain a one program who can go out and recruit nationally as well. And that's really what Maryland, kind of needs to do a little bit is keep the guys home that you're supposed to keep home. They obviously have Zion Ely. That's huge for them. Would love if they could get Emmanuel Iheanacho, but it doesn't look like they're going to be able to get him. But even if you only keep one of those two guys, you should be able to supplement it with some more players. And Mike Locksley does do a good job of going into Maryland and getting some underrated guys and stuff. And he does develop some guys pretty well. It's just unfortunate for Maryland that they never really seem to see that development turn into wins for the. I shouldn't say they never do. They improve
Right.
their record every year after COVID for a few years. It's not happened as maybe consistently as we'd love to
That's right.
see. And
Yep.
I don't think Mike Locksley is on the hot seat as much as some other people say. He had one down year this last year. And I don't think coaches are going to be getting fired as much as they used to back in the day with the way things are. So, Virginia, good stuff there. North Carolina, I agree with that program as well, especially when they were, they had like the Drake May and then they had the Sam Howell, good quarterback play that was kind of leading them there. That seems like kind of the formula that Mike Locksley could work off of. And then Ole Miss, Maryland fans would be ecstatic if they got to Ole Miss's level, but it is attainable. I mean, you could get to that level theoretically, and if they get to that level, it would be awesome for them.
Agreed. Agreed.
So. All right, let's go kind of rapid fire here, Jeff. We'll go from the top to the bottom. Wisconsin, give us your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah. Wisconsin, 52% win rate, and really pretty good recruiting average. I mean, 34th the last 5 years, tied for 30th in NFL production. So we all know, Wisconsin for years, the model of consistency, and then the last 2 years under Fickle, just a huge disappointment. So I'm saying who are they like now? Oklahoma State. So very similar. The Cowboys under Mike Gundy, consistently making bowls and everything, not necessarily a traditional power. But then last year, Oklahoma State won 3-9. And granted, that's only 1 year, but to me, that similar to Fickle, where everyone knows those two are good coaches, but both people are questioning both their future in their current position. So I thought that was a good comp. Who they should be like is Utah. So Utah, just the consistency and getting, I think they should get back to the physical football. And I'm expecting that the strong defense like Utah has had under Kyle Whittingham. So who they should be like is kind of like going back to who they used to be. So I chose Utah there. And then who they most want to be like Clemson. I listened to a podcast last year, a Wisconsin podcast, where they said, if we could be like Clemson, that's who we should strive to be. And so that's why I'm going with that, right? That would mean they're getting into the top 10 some. They're making the playoffs some. I think it's a stretch to say they're going to win the national title. We know they're going to have to get into the top 10 in recruiting to win a national title. I'm not sure they can do that. So I guess it would be Clemson minus winning national titles would be a good stretch for Wisconsin. Comments on that?
Yeah, I like where you're at here. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy, good comparison there. I'm not disagreeing with the Utah one. I feel like there could be a better one for Utah there, or for Wisconsin there, other than Utah. But I can't really pinpoint one, so I'm not going to argue with you too much if I can't give an answer myself. And then Clemson definitely has a lofty goal. If they could get to that point where they're kind of making it, I would say Washington as well, but a little bit more consistent. Kind of
Yeah.
the way Washington's been with getting to the playoffs, but more consistency there. Washington made it twice, once in 2023, and what was it, 2014, 2015 when they made it.
Early year, but they've made it twice. Yeah,
Yeah,
and once in the 14 playoff, which is really impressive.
yeah. So good stuff there. All right, Purdue.
Purdue, so 43% win rate. But their uh, their recruiting rank 62nd in the nation. That's last in the Big Ten. So they've been the worst at um, you know recruiting. Draft pick production is 34th. So I'm saying they're like Mississippi State. Both have had some good periods under the right coach. So, Purdue, it's been Joe Tiller back in the 80s. Jeff Brom recently showed he brought him to the, Big Ten West title and the Big Ten championship game. In Mississippi State, Dan Mullen had some good success. Mike Leach was rolling until he passed away, unfortunately. So with the right coach, but it's been sporadic. So I think that is a good comp. Who they should be like, Kentucky. I know you didn't like the last time I mentioned Kentucky, but I looked it up. Up until last year, where Kentucky didn't make a bowl, they had made a bowl 8 straight years. That's consistency. Purdue would love to make a bowl 8 straight years. So that's why I said Kentucky. And actually, like Kentucky, both care about basketball more. Purdue doesn't have the history that Kentucky has, but it's a strong basketball school. So I think that's a good comp. And then who they most want to be like Washington, just that 60% winning percentage, making playoffs a couple times. Again, if they were able to achieve that, I think Purdue fans would be really, really happy to be like a Washington.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with Mississippi State there. I was actually going to suggest Mississippi State for another team here soon, but I think Purdue fits them as well. And Kentucky, I mean, you look at recruiting, you look at the success rate there. You could say Louisville under Jeff Brom because let's be honest,
Yeah.
Purdue under Jeff Brom was that's what that program should operate like, right? I mean, not necessarily a playoff contender, but they are getting the fan base excited, doing some really good things, and then ultimately they're going to rely on the program for their national basketball program for their national relevancy. So I guess I could see it from that standpoint with Kentucky. You look at the basketball program; we've kind of compared that a little bit too. Washington, I don't love the comparison. I can see where you're at with it though, but again, I don't know if I offer a different comparison. I mean, honestly, my other comparison is like probably Iowa, right? I mean that seems like the stretch kind of lofty goal they could get to because they were almost there. Like Iowa, right? They went to a Big Ten championship game. They just weren't able to do it consistently and get there again and again and again. So maybe Iowa's more of the realistic goal, but we're using Iowa so many times here.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
kind of
Because you're
is what it is.
consistent. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, so Arizona State, if they continue to be good, maybe them as another one there. Kansas State, maybe TCU. They kind of popped into the national championship one time. Purdue's probably not going to get there, so probably not that one. But all right, let's get to Northwestern here, Jeff.
yeah, 2 more here. So the number 16 team, Northwestern, 35% win rate since 1970. So that's pretty poor. 5-year national recruiting average of 58th. That's second worst in the Big Ten. No surprise, really. But NFL draft pick production is also 58th. So that's tied for second worst with Rutgers. So not very good from a numbers perspective. Who are they most like now? Vanderbilt, I'm calling out. Now, granted, Northwestern has had much higher highs in the last 20, 30 years than Vanderbilt. But I just think, both are still pretty inconsistent winning. The last 4 years for the Cats, they've been only 9-27 in conference. So that's 25% win rate. So that's why I'm saying Vanderbilt. It's based on really the most recent results. And kind of their up and down nature, and then the obvious strong academic schools in tough conferences. So that's the comp. I know it's going to be boring, but yes, Iowa. I keep on using them again and again. Just that consistency of winning for a school like Northwestern, that would be gold. They would love to have that. And then even further stretch, though, I'm calling out Stanford in David Shaw's heyday. So 2011 to 2017. And of course, Stanford also has strong academics, right? They were in a good conference in the Pac-12. They were able to produce consistent top 10 teams. They went to Rose Bowls 3 of 4 years and went 2-1 in those 3 Rose Bowls. That would mean if they're going to Rose Bowls, that means Northwestern is going to the playoffs some. Northwestern fans, again, would be ecstatic to be like Stanford under David Shaw. What say you, JR?
Yeah, the academic school comparisons there. Vanderbilt, love that. Stanford under David Shaw, love that. Honestly, I mean, this is gonna sound a little crazy, but just because I'm trying to get away from Iowa and try to use somebody else, it's not that Iowa fan. It's not that I'm not about you, but uh, could Northwestern? I mean, they made it to Big Ten championships games under Pat Fitzgerald. I would just say Northwestern under Pat Fitzgerald. Like,
Okay.
I mean, that was it's kind of like Purdue under Jeff Brom. Like, that was one of the best versions of the program I'd seen in my lifetime. If you really wanted to go with another school, I'd say probably like Missouri with what they've been able to do in the SEC a little bit. They went to two SEC championship games in 2013 and 2014. Now, they lost both of those pretty handily, but, well, not handily in the 13. They scored 42 points in that one. So there was there was competition there, if I'm remembering correctly. But they did lose to Auburn because that was Auburn's national championship year. However, the point still stands. Missouri kind of got up there a few times, but then they went down to like 1-11. So I don't know. Pat Fitzgerald years, but a little bit more consistent, so that way you're not 2-10 or 1-11 when you're not winning 10-11 games.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm outside and someone just came home. Probably my cousin
All good.
or nephew,
All
I
good.
should say. The last one we got here is Rutgers, JR. Last in the conference, 28% win rate since 1970, 5-year recruiting average of 40th, and then 58th in the NFL draft pick production. Not very good. I'm going to go with another comp, Virginia again, but Rutgers is in that Northeast corridor. Access a lot of talent there in New Jersey, a ton of talent. They can get players from Maryland and Northern Virginia, so there's no excuse for Rutgers not to be better in recruiting, in my view. And then, like Virginia, just a school that should be performing better than they have. So that's the comp. This is going to feel redundant again, but who they should be like, the Kentucky, where 8 straight bowls. If Shiano could achieve that, I think Rutgers fans would be pretty damn happy. I also like the comp because Kentucky is a more physical style. And the just Stoops finding ways to unconventional ways to, like, Stoops was like stealing talent out of Ohio, the players that wouldn't all be able to commit to Ohio State. He would get like those secondary kids that are still really good, right? I think Rutgers could do some of the same thing in the Northeast. And then who would most be like Iowa again? I know we're killing the dead horse there, but when you're talking about teams like a Rutgers with a 28% win rate since 70, the last 5 years their win rate is 29%. That's why I'm going with an Iowa who's winning at a close to a 60% rate. It's almost doubling their win rate. So I know it's boring, and I know Iowa's ceiling is not real high, but they win consistently, and they go to bowl games consistently. And for bottom feeders, historical bottom feeders like Rutgers, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I like what you did with Virginia there. Kentucky obviously makes sense. I would say a team they should try to be like. I'd go away from the SEC though, and I'd stick in the ACC, and I'd say Duke with what they did under Mike
Okay.
Elko, and then now under Danny. What's his name? Martinez? Is that no? What's his
Uh,
last name?
yeah. Who is the
The
coach
Duke
here?
coach, former Penn State defensive coordinator. I don't can't remember his last name right
Yeah.
now. Anyway,
Yeah.
you know how I'm talking about, Danny. For him, what he's doing at Duke now and what Mike Elko was able to do there, I think that Rutgers could get to that level of maybe not 9-3 as much, but 8-4, kind of in those ranges, and taking down some top ranked teams. Because at Rutgers, that's a big thing, is they need to take down some ranked teams, and Duke has been
Right.
able to do that. Not necessarily saying they're going to take down Clemson or anything like that, but they could get there. And then Jeff, for the sake of not using Iowa again, and this is going to be a lofty one, but I see some of the possibility there. I'm going to say Tennessee. I think Rutgers could possibly get to that level. In fact, if you look at the past 5 years, you look at total win percentage, Rutgers has a higher total win percentage in the past 5 years than Tennessee has. It's actually kind of insane. Not conference win percentage or anything like that, but you look at total
Total.
win percentage. Rutgers is higher than Tennessee. If they're higher than Tennessee right now, could they possibly get there at some point? Maybe. It might seem like a stretch, but for them to have a win percentage that high, I think that could impact things. So, Jeff, that's what I got. Anything else you want to get to before we get out of here?
No, I think that's it. And again, this sets the stage for in the coming weeks to talk more about expectations for next year, and just knowing the history of these teams can help better predict future success. So pretty cool exercise, and for some of them it's like, yeah, this was an obvious one that fits, and for others it's like, oh my god, do I have to go back to Iowa again? Do I have to call out Kentucky again? But
Well,
yeah, I
and
mean,
you
the best
and I are
comps.
Big Ten guys.
Yeah,
It's easier to do that with some of the Big Ten teams because we know them best.
yeah, and the SEC teams were easy to call. I just had a hard time when you looked at Big 12 and ACC teams. So many of them are like, they had no consistency. It's like, do I want to put them as a comp when they're consistently like not being consistent? That's the issue, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
the Big Ten and the SEC they're just the two strongest conferences, no doubt. I mean, the gap is so huge; it's bigger than it's ever been. So
Totally. Totally. All right, Jeff. Hey, we appreciate you being here, everybody. We appreciate you listening to Big Jeff's Insights. Always does a great job. If you look on the thumbnail, I do got to show this to you, Jeff. I don't know if you saw it. My thumbnail, I put Kirk Cinetti in a Michigan State outfit there, and gave Wisconsin or Burt back his Wisconsin W there. I was pretty proud of that.
nice, nice. You're great at graphics. I'm glad you're doing them and not me. That's all I have to say.
Hey, I'll bring the graphics. You bring the data. How about that? That's a good workout, huh?
That's a good deal.
All right, Jeff, get back to your family. We appreciate you coming on here. Everybody, we appreciate you watching, being with us. Have a good one, everybody. See you next time.